Martin Scorsese's movie, The Irishman, is a big-deal crime movie featuring Robert De Niro as a guy named Frank Sheeran, who's both a trucker and a hitman. Scorsese directed and produced the movie, which Steven Zaillian wrote based on the book I Heard You Paint Houses by Charles Brandt. In the flick, Frank tells his story about how he went from driving trucks to working for the mafia, and how he became buddies with a big-time mob guy named Russell Bufalino, played by Joe Pesci, and a union boss named Jimmy Hoffa, played by Al Pacino. Things get messy when Hoffa gets into a fight with the mafia, and Frank's stuck in the middle. The movie's got a bunch of other stars too, like Ray Romano and Harvey Keitel. People really loved The Irishman. It's not just another mob movie. It's about an old gangster looking back on his life and feeling sorry for the bad stuff he did. The acting's top-notch, and it looks great on screen. It even got nominated for 10 Oscars. It's a long one, over 3 hours, but it's worth the watch from beginning to end. The Gentleman is a Guy Ritchie film that's all about action and laughs. It's got Matthew McConaughey playing a Yank who's big in the English weed business and wants to sell his criminal empire. This idea kicks off a wild scramble as other crooks try to grab his turf. The cast is stacked with cool actors like Charlie Hunnam, Colin Farrell, and Hugh Grant. It's classic Ritchie, thrilling, stylish, and full of chuckles. The story's a wild ride with some wacky folks, and Hugh Grant, not Ritchie himself, is the one spinning the yarn. But you can't really trust what he says. The real gems in the movie are the performances, especially from Grant, Hunnam, and Farrell. Since it hit the screens in 2019, The Gentleman has raked in the praise and the cash, making $115 million, and even getting its own Netflix show that's kinda different from the film. Avengement is a hardcore action movie by Jesse V. Johnson, with Scott Adkins playing a tough guy who busts out of jail to settle scores with the folks who turned him into a killer. It's the 6th time Adkins and Johnson have teamed up, and they wrote this one with Stu Small. The story's got a bit of old-school samurai vibe, inspired by a classic called Harakiri. The cast is packed with names like Craig Fairbrass and Nick Moran. It's a throwback to those raw action movies with lots of fights and feels, and critics gave it a thumbs up. It's not your typical revenge movie. It's got some sick fight scenes and looks amazing. Scott Adkins really brings it as the main man, and Avengement is all about payback without pulling any punches. So if you're into gritty, edge-of-your-seat crime movies, you'll want to check this one out. The Equalizer is a movie where Denzel Washington plays Robert McCall, a tough ex-Marine and spy who comes back to kick some butt and save a young girl from bad guys who traffic people. It's based on an old TV show from the 80s. Antoine Fuqua directed it, and Richard Wenk wrote it. The film also stars Chloe Grace Moretz and a couple of other big names. When it first came out in 2014, it made a lot of money, even though not all the critics liked it. It's turned into a whole series now, with a 2nd and 3rd movie coming out in 2018 and 2023. Some people say the story's a bit weak, but hey, you watch The Equalizer for the cool fights and action, not the plot. Denzel Washington is just awesome in it. The Highwaymen is a movie set back in the day, directed by John Lee Hancock. It's got Kevin Costner and Woody Harrelson playing a couple of old-school Texas Rangers from the 1930s who are on a mission to catch the infamous Bonnie and Clyde. The script's by John Fusco, and it's got a bunch of other stars like Kathy Bates and Kim Dickens. This flick takes a different look at the whole Bonnie and Clyde chase by telling it from the point of view of the guys trying to nab them. Some critics weren't sure what to make of it, but the acting's solid, especially from Costner and Harrelson. They've got this cool vibe going on that really drives the movie. Bonnie and Clyde? They're just part of the backdrop to the real story of these two Rangers coming back to do what they do best. The Mule is a movie directed by Clint Eastwood, who also stars as an old war vet in his 80s who starts delivering drugs. Nick Schenk wrote the movie, and it's based on a real story about an old guy who worked for a big drug cartel. Alongside Eastwood, you've got Bradley Cooper and other big names. When the movie came out in 2018, people really liked it, and they had a lot of good things to say about Eastwood's work, both behind and in front of the camera. It's got a lot of heart, and Eastwood's acting is something special, but it's not just about feelings. It's a crime movie with lots of twists and excitement. The music's great too, featuring a song by Toby Keith. Sure, the movie's not perfect, but it's a touching and thrilling tale about looking back on life and figuring out what's important. The Outsider is a movie about an American guy named Nick, played by Jared Leto, who's locked up in Japan after World War II. He saves a Yakuza guy's life and gets to join their gang as a thank you. The film's got other actors like Tadanobu Asano and Emile Hirsch. Critics weren't too keen on it, but regular folks found it pretty good. The story's not super original, and the characters are kind of cliché, but the old-time Japanese look of the movie is cool, and it's shot in a way that's pretty dramatic. It's not the best Yakuza movie ever, but it's still a fun watch and better than some people say. War Dogs is a funny crime movie by Todd Phillips, where Jonah Hill and Miles Teller play two dudes who become big-time arms dealers for the US Army. Phillips also helped write it, and it's kinda based on a real story from a Rolling Stone article. The critics were split on it, but it made good money. It's not exactly the truest story out there, but it's a blast to watch, especially with Jonah Hill nailing it and getting props at the Golden Globes. It's not quite Wolf of Wall Street, but Jonah Hill is on fire, and he's got this awesome vibe with Miles Teller, who's also pretty great. All in all, War Dogs is about a couple of sketchy guys who try to outsmart the government and end up on a wild ride.